Before we begin, thank you for being here. This story is about a nurse who saw what the galaxy's greatest medical system missed. Humans often say, "I'm fine," even when they're breaking inside. And when a machine mistakes that endurance for safety, mercy can become deadly. So listen closely, because Mira Halden is about to teach the galaxy how humans really hurt. The Earth nurse who taught the galaxy how humans hurt Mira Halden noticed the quiet ones first. That was not a rule printed in any Galaxy Council medical manual. It was something she had learned from Earth miners, dock welders, hull mechanics, farm crews, field medics, and rescue volunteers who came into emergency rooms with broken ribs and still asked whether someone else needed the bed more. The quiet ones worried her most. Kalira Ring moved above the gray mining moon of Hestara 6 like a clean white crown. From the outside, it looked like everything the Galaxy Council promised to be, with bright corridors, quiet machines, polished treatment bays, and medical teams from many member species working under one shared emergency system. Every patient, no matter their world, was supposed to be sorted by need, not status. Mira had worked there for almost 3 years. She was a senior triage nurse assigned to the Earth Labor Wing, though the hospital called that title informal. On paper, there were no species wings, no labor wings, and no political wings. There was only the Mercy Allocation Grid, a council-approved system that ranked every incoming patient by injury, distress, survival chance, and treatment urgency. The grid decided who went first. Mira decided whether she could live with that decision. At the start of her shift, the emergency ward was already full. A loader accident on dock 4 had sent 9 patients up from the moon. 2 were Vare apprentices with pressure burns. 1 was a Kelladon pipe master with cracked shell plates. The rest were Earth workers, most of them covered in gray dust from the helium tunnels. Mira stood beside the intake wall, one hand on the scanner rail, watching names appear and change colors. Green meant wait, amber meant monitor, red meant immediate care. Caleb Rusk appeared in amber. He was an Earthborn oxygen systems mechanic from the Hestar contract crew. He sat on the floor because all the chairs were full. His left hand was pressed against his lower ribs, and his right hand held an oxygen mask against the small face of a young Vare apprentice whose breathing came in ragged clicks. The Vare apprentice flashed red. Caleb stayed amber. Mira crossed the intake bay. Around her, the ward pulsed with controlled urgency. Alien distress calls moved through speakers in layered tones. Human voices stayed lower, clipped, practical, try not to add noise. Caleb Rusk? Mira asked. He looked up at once. Yes, ma'am. I'm Fina. The kid needs the bed. He took more heat than I did. Mira crouched beside him. Let me check you while we move him. Really, I'm fine. It just feels tight. His voice was steady, but his lips had gone pale. Sweat stood along his hairline, cold and thin. His pupils were too sharp. His fingers around the oxygen mask had started to tremble with a rhythm that did not match fear. Mira looked at the wall. Caleb's mercy score had dropped again. The grid had read his speech as coherent, his posture as upright, his cooperation as high, and his vocal distress as low. It had decided that Caleb could wait. Mira knew better. Before Hestara 6, Mira had believed Kalira Ring could be better than the field ward she had known. She had taken the post because the council promised neutral medicine, and because Earth workers trusted anyone wearing an Earth medical pin in places where most signs were written for other bodies. Her first months had been hard, but not hopeless. She had seen Kelladon surgeons learn human blood pressure ranges. She had watched Vare respiratory teams adjust masks for human faces. She had convinced one triage unit that a human joking after a burn was not necessarily fine. The work had taught her patience. It had also taught her that systems rarely hated people. Systems did something colder. They made wrong assumptions at scale, then asked the injured to prove the assumption wrong while bleeding. That was why she watched the intake wall more carefully than younger staff understood. She did not only read the score. She read the path by which the score had arrived. When a patient screamed, the grid listened. When a patient shook, the grid listened. When a patient collapsed, the grid listened. But when a human sat still, answered politely, and said someone else needed care first, the grid heard order instead of danger. Bay 3, she said to the orderlies. A blue-lit assistant drone turned toward her. Mercy priority conflict. Patient Rusk is amber. Patient Sartem of Vair is red. Move Sartem to Bay 2 and Rusk to Bay 3. Now, the drone paused for less than a second. That pause meant the command had been recorded. Dr. Savak's run looked up from the central console. He was tall and narrow, with silver skin drawn tight over the fine bones of a species. His people showed alarm through colorless stillness. By that measure, he looked deeply alarmed. Nurse Halden, he said, explain the override. Internal bleed, Mira said. He's compensating, not stable. Compensating. The grid does not support immediate intervention. The grid is wrong. The sentence crossed the bay like a dropped instrument. Savax did not raise his voice. You are using species familiarity against council triage. Mira kept her eyes on Caleb as the orderlies lifted him. I'm using nursing. Caleb tried to protest again, then coughed. Blood touched his lower lip. The wall changed from amber to red too late. Savax saw it. So did everyone else. Mira followed Caleb into Bay 3 and did not look back. For the next 23 minutes, Kalira Ring became smaller than one table. Caleb's pressure crashed twice. His spleen had ruptured. A shard of fractured support plating had entered below the ribs and missed a major artery by less than the width of a fingernail. He stayed conscious longer than he should have. When the surgeon sealed the bleed, Caleb whispered, "The kid?" Mira looked toward Bay 2. Alive. Only then did Caleb let his eyes close. Mira should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the old cold, not in her stomach, the one that came whenever a human patient survived only because someone had ignored what a polished system said. Savac called her into the side office. Before the blood was dry on her gloves. The office had a transparent wall facing the emergency ward. It was meant to show trust. In practice, it made every reprimand public. Your manual override has been logged, Savac said. Mira stood with her hands clasped in front of her. She was still wearing the blood-spotted white coat. Good. The log will show he would have died in the waiting bay. That is not what it will show. It will show that you displaced a red patient for an amber patient based on intuition. Sartam was not displaced. He went to Bay 2, a bay that was being prepared for higher-risk pulmonary collapse. You changed 3 patient paths, and all 3 are alive. Savax's eyes narrowed. This hospital cannot operate on the instincts of every staff member who believes their species is special. Mira breathed once before answering. Humans are not special. We're just bad at convincing your machines that we are dying. His expression did not change, but she saw the thought land and be rejected. You will remain off intake for the rest of the shift, he said. You may chart under supervision. Mira looked through the glass. A new group of patients had come in from the same accident. One of them was a woman in a torn earth contract jacket. She stood near the intake rail with one arm clamped over her abdomen and a work tablet in the other hand. Her name appeared on the wall. Alara Voss. Shift Captain. Earth Industrial Crew. Mercy Score Amber. Alara was speaking to a rescue officer. Mira could not hear the words through the office glass, but she knew the shape of that posture. Alara was giving names. She was telling them who was still missing, who had been near the blast door, and who needed pressure support first. Mira stepped toward the door. Savac said, "Nurse Halden." Mira did not stop. That woman needs a scan. The grid has assigned her to observation. She is holding herself closed. You are suspended from intake. Mira opened the door. 2 security orderlies moved into her path. They were polite. That made it worse. Across the ward, Alara turned her head toward a smaller patient being wheeled into red priority. Her mouth moved around a question. She looked relieved at the answer. Then her knees bent. Not sharply, not dramatically. She lowered as if she had decided to rest. Mira shoved past one orderly before the second caught her arm. Alara, Mira called. The wall changed from amber to red. Again, too late. By the time they opened Alara Voss in Base 6, the internal bleeding had been running long enough to turn survival into a matter of luck. Luck had left the room before Mira reached the door. Alara died with her boots still on. Her last recorded words were not about herself. Did Toman get the bed? Mira heard the playback after midnight, alone at a record station she was not supposed to use. Toman was the Vare apprentice from Dock 4. He was alive because Alara had pointed the intake team toward him, insisted that his breathing was worse, and said she could wait. The grid had marked that sentence as low distress. Mira sat in the thin blue light of the record station and listened to it 3 times. Then she opened the mortality files for every Earth worker who had died on Kalira Ring in the last 6 months. By morning, she had found 14. By the next evening, she had found 31. The list changed the way she heard the ward. A human laugh near the intake doors stopped sounding like relief and started sounding like a warning. A man apologizing for bleeding on the floor made her turn faster than an alarm. A woman telling a medic that her pain was only a 6 made Mira look at the pressure curve before looking at the pain score. She began speaking to the families when she could. Not as an investigator, because she had no authority for that. She called a follow-up. She asked what the patient had said in the transport. She asked whether the patient usually minimized pain. She asked whether they had kept working after the injury. The answers came with the same tired rhythm. He did not want to slow the crew. She thought the younger ones were worse. He said it looked bad, but felt manageable. She told us not to worry until the job was safe. One father from an Earthwater crew sent Mira a voice note from his son. The young man had recorded it for his mother while waiting in triage. His voice was calm, almost embarrassed. He said the doctors were busy, and he would be home after they patched him up. He died 11 minutes later from a pressure bleed the grid had marked for observation. Mira listened to that note in a storage alcove with one hand pressed against the wall. She did not cry. The hospital had trained that out of her during shifts. But she stayed there until her breathing slowed, because she understood how grief could become useless if it rushed ahead of the work. The dead had different names, different injuries, different work crews, and different times of arrival. But the pattern underneath them was the same. A human patient remained coherent. A human patient underreported pain. A human patient assisted others at intake. A human patient showed low vocal distress. A human patient was delayed. A human patient died. Mira built the list in a private file and named it Quiet Cases. She knew it was not wise. She also knew she would not stop. For 2 days, she worked under supervision and stole time between charts. She read old scans, ambulance notes, body camera transcripts, intake audio, crew reports, and insurance summaries. The official language was clean and bloodless. It said there had been no deviation from council priority standard. It said delayed intervention remained within acceptable range. It said the patient had remained responsive until collapse. One phrase appeared so often she began to hate it. Self-reported tolerable pain. Earthworkers said things like that. Not because the pain was tolerable. Because the rent was not. Because crew leaders did not want to scare apprentices. Because nobody wanted to be the one who took a bed from someone who looked worse. Because on Earth, and in every rough place humans had carried Earth with them, a person could be falling apart and still say, "I'm okay." Mira had said it herself once, years earlier, after her brother died in a relief ward outside Port Nairobi. His report had used similar words. It said he was responsive until final collapse, with stable effect and low vocal distress. She had been younger then, angry but unsure where to place the anger. She had told herself, the system missed him because the room was overloaded, because the scans failed, because disasters made cruel choices necessary. Now she saw the same language on Kalira Ring, inside the council's cleanest medicine. It had not been one room. It had been a pattern. Dr. Savak's run found her in Archive 19, just after the second shift bell. "You do not have clearance for retrospective mortality audit," he said. Mira did not close the file. Someone should. The hospital already audits deaths. The hospital audits whether staff followed the grid. It does not audit whether the grid was wrong. Savak stepped closer to the wall display. His reflection overlapped the list of human names. "You are making a political claim. I'm making a clinical one. You are an Earth nurse reviewing Earth cases after an emotional incident." Mira looked at him then. Alara Voss died because she was calm. Caleb Rusk lived because I stopped trusting the score. That is not emotion. That is data with a pulse. His jaw tightened. Kalira Ring is under review because of your override. Orison Mutual Care has requested all related records. The Council Medical Board expects cooperation. If you continue this, you risk your license. If I stop, more humans die quietly enough to make everyone comfortable. For a moment, Savax seemed almost tired. You do not understand the burden of shared system. We treat hundreds of species. No emergency grid can be rebuilt around one culture's habit of hiding pain. Mira answered softly, because anger would give him an excuse not to hear her. Then maybe the shared system should stop punishing the patients who hide pain to protect everyone else. He ordered her out of the archive. An hour later, her access was reduced. 6 hours after that, Caleb Rusk's wife came to the hospital. Her name was Lien Rusk. She had oil marks under her nails and a child asleep against her shoulder. She stood outside the recovery bay with a sealed tablet in her hand and a look Mira recognized from families who had been given paperwork before they had been given answers. They said I should sign before he wakes fully, Lien said. Mira took the tablet and read the settlement. Summary. Orison Mutual Care Consortium would cover Caleb's emergency surgery and recovery transport. In return, the Rusk family accepted that Caleb had received extraordinary intervention outside Mercy Allocation Grid Priority Order. The family also agreed not to dispute the official finding that manual triage deviation had caused resource instability during the Hestar incident. Mira read the last line twice. The deviation contributed to adverse outcome in a subsequent patient. They were placing Alara's death on her. Lien watched Mira's face. If we don't sign, they said the surgery might be reclassified as non-standard care. We can't pay that. They also said Caleb's contract housing depends on medical standing. Mira felt something inside her go very still. Do not sign yet, she said. Can you stop them? Mira looked through the recovery glass at Caleb. He was pale but alive. He had a tube under his nose and a pressure band around his ribs. He had no idea that his survival was being turned into a weapon. I don't know, she said, but I know why they need your signature. The settlement trap did more than frighten Lien. It showed Mira how carefully Orison had built its defenses around ordinary people. Caleb did not need a lawyer in theory. In practice, he needed one immediately. His contract housing, recovery coverage, and transport rights were all tied to the same insurer that wanted his silence. The language was soft, but the meaning was simple. Agree that Mira was the problem, or carry the cost of staying alive. That night, Lien sat beside Caleb's bed and read the agreement aloud because Caleb's vision still blurred. He listened without moving until she reached the line about resource instability. Then he asked for Mira. She came in expecting confusion. Caleb looked weak, but his eyes were clear. They're saying you killed Alara by saving me, he said. They're trying to make the timelines serve them. Did you? The question did not offend her. It was the question that had sat under her ribs since Alara died. No, Mira said, but I could not reach her in time. Caleb closed his eyes. She told them to take Toman. I heard her. She kept saying the little. One was scared. I know. Then I won't sign a lie about her. Lien looked at him sharply. Caleb. He turned his head toward his wife with effort. I know what it costs. Mira left the room before they could ask her to bless the choice. She had no right to make poverty noble for them. She only knew that Orison had counted on decent people being too tired, too afraid, and too indebted to resist. The next morning, the deadline arrived. It came as a council circular marked routine systems improvement. Kalira Ring would receive the newest Mercy Allocation grid update within 72 hours. After that, the update would deploy across the Council hospital network, including every orbital clinic serving Earth industrial settlements, transport docks, terraforming crews, and labor colonies. Mira stood in a maintenance corridor and read the message 3 times. The update included expanded labor population modeling. That meant Orison was not trying to defend one hospital. It was trying to export the same logic everywhere. If the update went live, the quiet cases would multiply across the galaxy. A human with a crushed lung on a cargo moon would be told to wait because he could still answer questions. A woman with internal bleeding on a refinery platform would be told to sit because she said someone else looked worse. A mechanic with failing organs would be marked stable because he helped carry another patient in. The news traveled through the labor decks faster than official warnings ever did. By the second day, Earth crews on Hestara 6 had begun painting small white bands around their sleeves. It was not a strike. They could not afford a strike. It was only a sign that they had heard about Allura, Caleb, and the quiet cases. Kalira Ring administrators hated the bands. They called them disruptive. Workers called them reminders. Alien staff began asking what the bands meant. And for once the answer did not come from a council statement. It came from people who had carried friends into clinics and watched machines misunderstand them. Mira saw one band on a Keladin pipe master who was not human. He stood outside recovery with a heavy arm folded across his cracked chest. When she asked why he wore it, he said his Earth crew chief had once dragged him out of a burning maintenance tunnel while claiming she was fine. She had not been fine. That mattered. The issue was widening beyond Earth outrage. It was becoming a question other species could understand through humans they knew personally. Orza noticed too. Its next statement warned against emotional contamination of medical trust. Mira printed that phrase and pinned it inside her locker. Emotional contamination. That was what they called memory when memory belonged to workers. Mira needed the training data. She could not access it anymore. So she went to Jalen. Jalen worked records recovery in the old administrative spine of Kalira Ring, where the walls were less polished and the lights hummed. He was not from Earth. His species had wide black eyes and narrow hands built for delicate machine work. He had once told Mira that human coffee tasted like a maintenance fire. He drank it anyway, because the Earth staff always looked less lonely when he did. He listened without interrupting while she explained the quiet cases, the settlement, the update, and the 72-hour window. When she finished, Jalen said, "If I help, I lose my post. Yes. If I do not help, they may use the same model on every human worker in council space. Yes." He rubbed one hand over his face. "I dislike clear moral choices. They leave no room for cowardice." Mira almost smiled. "Can you get the original audit?" "Not from here." But older versions were mirrored before Orison took over the interface. There is a dead storage vault behind the pre-council compatibility layer. Nobody uses it because nobody enjoys pain. That sounds promising. That sounds illegal. Also promising. They worked through the night inside a records room cold enough to numb Mira's fingertips. Jalen opened locked archive branches while Mira fed him patient names and incident dates. The system resisted with polite warnings. Jalen insulted it in 3 languages. Near morning, the first training file opened. It was older than Kalira Ring's current interface. The file showed that the Mercy Grid had learned from Earth disaster. Medicine during the border relief wars, when field hospitals treated humans and non-humans during evacuation collapses. Mira read the samples and felt the room narrow. The records showed human patients walking despite severe trauma. They showed human patients denying pain while helping evacuate others. They showed human patients remaining calm during blood loss and asking for other people to be treated first. Jalen whispered, "This is what taught the grid." "Not all of it," Mira said, "but enough." Then she found the missing warning. It had been attached to the Earth trauma records in plain clinical language. It said human calmness must not be treated as medical stability. It said verbal minimization was common when humans felt responsible for others. It also said staff should screen for hidden injury when a human remained unusually controlled after trauma. Mira stared at the words until they blurred. Earth had warned them. The warning had been there. Jalen opened the version Orison had deployed. The warning was gone. In its place was a shorter tag. It treated low vocal distress, cooperation, and continued movement as signs that a patient could safely wait. Mira leaned back from the console. She was not surprised exactly. She had been walking toward this truth for days. But seeing it written so cleanly made it worse. "Who removed the warning?" she asked. Jalen traced the revision path. Orison Mutual Care. Pre-deployment optimization. Signed by their actuarial medicine division. Actuarial medicine, Mira repeated. "It gets worse." He opened another layer. The file described something Orison called functional distress adjustment. Jalen translated it into plain speech. If an Earth industrial worker could still talk, stand, follow orders, or help someone else, the grid lowered their urgency. Below it sat another modifier. Labor cost delay modifier. Jalen went quiet. Mira did not need him to explain the rest. The modifier compared the cost of treating insured laborers immediately against the cost of making them wait under observation. Earth industrial workers had high injury rates and thin political protection. A delay that did not immediately reduce productivity. Looked efficient. Human endurance had become a budget line. Jalen found one more file before the lockdown. It was not a table. It was a recommendation memo from Horizon's actuarial division to the council procurement office. The memo argued that human crews showed unusually high task persistence after injury. It also argued that immediate intervention often produced limited additional productivity benefit compared with monitored delay. Mira read the sentence twice, then a third time. Limited additional productivity benefit. They had found a way to ask how quickly a human body needed help before that help stopped being profitable. Beneath the memo was a projected savings summary. It covered orbital mines, freight docks, construction habitats, terraforming stations, and hazardous repair crews. The numbers were enormous. They were also faceless. No line mentioned Alara Voss. No line mentioned the father who recorded a calm message to his mother. No line mentioned the young apprentices who learned from older workers that fear should be swallowed until the job was done. This is not only about Kalira, Jalen said. No, Mira said. Kalira was the test case. That was the second moment the story changed shape for her. The first had been Alara lowering herself to the floor. A hospital mistake could be corrected. A profitable model would defend itself. Copy it, Mira said. They will know. Copy it. Jalen did. They were leaving the record spine when Savax Rin stepped from the corridor shadow. For once, he looked angry. Give me the drive, he said. Mira closed her hand around it. You knew. I knew Horizon adjusted the grid. Every hospital director knows vendors adjust models. I did not know what they removed. Now you do. And now I know you obtained restricted architecture during an active investigation. Do you understand what they will do with that? They are already doing it. He looked at Jalen, then back at Mira. You think truth wins because it is true. That is not how council systems work. They will question your access, then your motives, then your species. By the time they finish, the truth will look like misconduct. Mira stepped closer. Then help me. Make it harder for them. Savax did not answer. Alarms sounded before he could. Not medical alarms. Administrative lockdown. Horizon had detected the breach. The breach turned a private suspicion into a public accusation. Within 12 minutes, Mira was suspended from duty. Within 40, the hospital notified Earth liaison staff that nurse Mira Halden had manipulated restricted triage records during a politically sensitive review. By the end of the day, Horizon released a preliminary statement claiming that an Earth staff member had endangered patient trust by selectively extracting data after a disciplinary event. They did not name her. They did not need to. The Earth worker forums named her by evening. Some called her reckless. More called her brave. Families of quiet cases began posting their own reports. A miner on Kestrel platform wrote that his brother had died, saying his pain was not bad yet. A dock mother from Luma Station said her daughter had been marked stable because she kept giving directions after a blast. A field medic uploaded an old Earth training note that said calm does not mean safe. By the next morning, the story had left the hospital. Earth did not respond with one voice at first. That made the response feel real. The medical liaison office wanted restraint. The labor unions wanted the grid shut down immediately. The diplomatic corps wanted verified evidence before accusing Horizon in public. Families wanted names reopened. Colony administrators wanted to know whether they had been sending injured workers into a system already tilted against them. For 12 hours, the argument raged across channels Mira could only half follow while confined to quarters. Then Earth Emergency Medicine released a single statement signed by field doctors, nurses, medics, and rescue captains from 27 settlements. It did not threaten the council. It did not flatter it either. Human patients frequently minimize pain under duty pressure. Any system that treats that behavior as stability places them at avoidable risk. The statement was professional. That made it devastating. It said what Mira had been saying, but with the weight of thousands of practitioners behind it. The council could dismiss one nurse as emotional. It would be harder to dismiss Earth medicine as a species tantrum. By the following evening, it reached the Galaxy Council. Councillor Varen Osk moved first. He chaired the Health Stability Committee and had built his career on the promise that council medicine was neutral, efficient, and above politics. He called for a hearing to determine whether Earth representatives were attempting to discredit a shared medical system for diplomatic advantage. Earth accepted the hearing before Orizon could frame it as refusal. Mira would testify because she had overridden the grid, found the records, and carried the accusation. Savax came to her quarters 6 hours before departure. She had not slept. Her small room looked over the dark curve of Hestaris 6. She had packed one bag and left her nursing coat folded on the bed because she did not know if she still had the right to wear it. Savax stood in the doorway with a sealed data wafer in his hand. "This is my director access log," he said. Mira did not take it. Why? Because it shows the hospital received no copy of the removed Earth warnings. It also shows Orizon represented the model as council compliant after removing them. That helps me. It helps Kalira Ring survive. Is that all? His gaze moved to the folded coat. No. For a moment, he looked older. Not softer, but less certain. I watched Alara Voss speak for 3 minutes while dying. I saw cooperation and thought it meant stability. You saw effort and understood it meant danger. That difference killed her. I am not ready to forgive myself, but I am ready to stop defending the error. Mira took the wafer. "You may have to say that in the chamber," she said. "I know. The trip to the council chamber took 4 hours by diplomatic shuttle." Mira spent most of it listening to Alara's last recording and hating herself for needing it. An Earth legal envoy sat across from her. His name was Tomas Venn. He was precise, tired, and kind in the controlled way of people who had seen too many hearings become traps. "They will try to make this about special treatment," he said. "Do not let them. I am not asking for special treatment. I know, but they will say you are. If you say humans hurt differently, they will hear humans want priority. You need to say the system must learn when any species hides danger." Mira nodded. "They will also use Alara's death against you," he said. Mira looked out the shuttle window. The council complex hung ahead, a ring of black stone and gold light around a diplomatic corps older than several member civilizations. "They already have," she said. On the shuttle, Mira also reviewed the names. Tomas told her she did not have to carry them all into the chamber. He said 3 cases would be cleaner. A hearing like clean lines. Mira understood the tactic and still refused. "They became invisible because the system rounded them down," she said. "I will not do that again for convenience." Tomas considered that, then changed the presentation plan. Instead of building a narrow case around Caleb and Alara, he created a quiet appendix of names that could be opened if the chamber tried to call the pattern isolated. It was a legal choice. It was also a moral one. Mira was beginning to learn that the best arguments did both. She practiced her opening once. It sounded too polished. She stopped. The people she was speaking for had not died in polished sentences. They had died saying ordinary things. "Help them first. I can wait. Tell them not to worry." When the shuttle docked, she deleted the opening from her tablet. The Galaxy Council chamber was not built for comfort. It was built to make individuals feel temporary. Tiered platforms rose in a circle. Translation fields glowed above each delegation. The central floor was bare except for a witness stand, 3 evidence pylons, and the seal of the council set into the stone. Mira entered without her nursing coat. She wore a plain dark suit with an Earth medical pin on the lapel. It felt wrong. She wanted pockets, gloves, a scanner, something useful in her hands. Instead, she carried a folder of names and a data wafer full of dead voices. Councillor Varen Osk opened the hearing with polished regret. He was broad-shouldered, blue-skinned, and calm the way of a politician who had never had to. Run down a hospital corridor, holding pressure on a wound. This chamber convenes to examine allegations made by Earth medical staff against the Mercy Allocation Grid, a system used across council hospitals to preserve life under crisis conditions. We will also examine whether restricted medical architecture was unlawfully accessed and whether manual interference at Kalira Ring contributed to preventable harm. There it was. Mira had not even sat down before Alara's death was placed near her feet. Orizin's representative spoke next. Her name was Selvarik, Senior Counsel for Actuarial Care Systems. She had a warm voice and empty eyes. Orizin Mutual Care Consortium rejects the accusation that cost influenced emergency care. The grid evaluates distress patterns across species to allocate limited resources. Humans, by documented pattern, often remain functional under trauma. The system recognizes this. It does not punish it. Dr. Savax Ren sat at the medical witness platform, his hands folded, his face unreadable. Varen turned to Mira. Nurse Halden, you overrode the grid during the Hestara intake. Correct? Yes. You moved Caleb Rusk ahead of patients with higher emergency scores. Correct. I moved him because he was bleeding internally. That was not my question. Then yes. A subsequent patient, Alara Voss of Earth, died during that period of resource instability. Correct. Mira felt the chamber focus on her. Alara Voss died because the grid delayed her, she said. Selvarik rose smoothly. The record shows Nurse Halden had already disrupted resource order. Mira looked at her. The record also shows the grid called Alara Low Distress because she used her last strength to help other patients. Varen lifted one hand. You will have time to present evidence. First, this chamber must understand whether your claim is medical or political. It is medical, Mira said. It became political when the system refused to count human suffering unless it sounded the way the system expected. A low murmur moved through the tears. Varen's expression cooled. Careful, Nurse Halden. Tomas Venn leaned toward her from the earth table, but Mira did not look back. She had spent her life being careful around rooms that mistook calm for weakness. She was done helping them misunderstand her. Orizin spoke first. Selvarik displayed charts showing survival rates across species, overall efficiency improvements, and average wait time reduction. The charts were beautiful. They were also designed to drown the dead in averages. She showed that human patients often retained speech and movement longer than many species under comparable trauma. She showed that humans often reported less pain than scans later explained. Then she turned to the chamber with measured sorrow. Human stoicism is culturally admirable, but emergency systems cannot be held responsible for every species' social reluctance to communicate distress. Mira wrote one word on her notepad: reluctance, as if Alara had been shy about dying. Varen then allowed a few delegates to question Earth motives before he allowed them to question Orizin methods. That order was not accidental. If Mira could be painted as an Earth instrument first, every fact she carried would arrive already stained. A delegate from the Maru Combine asked whether Earth labor contracts encouraged underreporting because human crews were paid by completion targets. A delegate from Athalan Protectorates asked whether Earth culture romanticized suffering, making the species difficult to treat. A trade block observer asked whether shutting down the grid update would endanger non-human patients waiting for improved allocation. Each question had a blade wrapped in concern. Mira answered only what was asked and refused a trap inside it. Yes, some Earth contracts rewarded endurance. No, that did not permit hospitals to ignore injury. Yes, human cultures often praise toughness. No, that did not mean pain was absent. Yes, the grid helped many patients. No, a useful system did not become sacred when it harmed a group it had been warned about. With every question, the shape of the fight became clearer. They wanted to turn a design failure into a patient behavior problem. Where her turn came, she did not start with Alara. She did not start with Caleb. She started with 2 scans. The first belonged to a Keladin Pipe Master injured in the same Hestara blast. The second belonged to Caleb Rusk. The injuries were different, but comparable in urgency. The Kelladon patient had gone red within 8 seconds because shell discoloration and distress vibrations matched the grid's danger model. Caleb remained amber for more than 4 minutes because he sat upright, answered questions, and helped Sartem breathe. Mira kept her voice even. The grid did not see a stable patient. It saw the cooperative human and called that stability. That is the difference. Then she asked the chamber to display one non-human patient whose species expressed distress through color shift. The patient had been saved because the grid recognized the color change as danger. Beside it, she displayed an Earth patient whose skin had gone gray, whose pulse had thinned, and whose voice remained steady. The grid had treated steadiness as reassurance. Every species teaches medicine how to see it, Mira said. Some teach through color, some through sound, some through chemical signals. Humans often teach through contradiction. We say we are fine when the scan says we are not. That contradiction should raise urgency, not lower it. This was the first time several medical delegates looked at the data rather than at her. They were not convinced, but they were thinking as clinicians again. That mattered because Orizin's argument needed them thinking as administrators. Selv var rikstot. The Rusk case survived because I broke protocol, or because the system had already identified him as monitor priority and would have escalated. Mira changed the display. The next file was Alara Voss. No photo, no dramatic image, just intake timing, scan delay, audio markers, and a mercy score falling each time Alara spoke clearly. Alara Voss reported that others needed help first. The grid lowered her distress estimate. She gave names to rescue teams. The grid marked high cognitive function. She did not scream. The grid marked low vocal distress. She stood until she could not. The grid marked mobility. By the time the score changed, she was beyond recovery. Varen leaned forward. Are you saying the system should ignore patient statements? No, Mira said. I am saying it should understand them. Selvarik spread both hands. That is exactly what it does. It interprets statements in statistical context. Then let the chamber hear that context. The room changed when the first voice played. It was a man from Kestrel platform, recorded 6 weeks before Hestara. I am okay. My leg's just stuck. Get Rian out first. He can't breathe. The grid had marked him low distress, cooperative, and safe for delay. The next voice was a woman from Luma Station. Don't tell my daughter I'm scared. Just tell her I'm coming. The grid had marked her stable. Then another voice played. I can wait. The kid's turning blue. The grid had marked it as low distress and other directed attention. Mira let a brief silence pass after each one. Not long enough to become theater. Long enough for the words to stop being data. The appendix of names opened then. Tomas did not read them. He let them move across the chamber wall in a slow column, paired with short intake phrases. The chamber saw human names from asteroid clinics, freight stations, refinery moons, and repair yards. Beside each name sat a last functional act. Assisted evacuation. Held pressure for another patient. Continued reporting crew locations. Declined immediate care. Carried a young patient to intake. The list did not accuse loudly. It accumulated. By the time it finished, the silence in the room had changed texture. It no longer belonged only to Earth. Selvarik objected after the recordings. This is emotional presentation. Mira looked at her. They were emotional patients. That is what patients are. Your system stripped the emotion out, mislabeled what remained, and called it medicine. Varen spoke sharply. Nurse Halden, you will confine your remarks to evidence. These are the evidence. The chamber went quiet. Mira moved to the training files. The Mercy Grid was trained partly on Earth disaster medicine from the border relief wars. In those settings, human patients often minimized pain, assisted others, and stayed calm during serious injury. Earth physicians attached warnings to those records. She placed the original warning on the central display. The display showed one plain warning. Human calmness must not be treated as medical stability. Mira let them read it. Then she placed the deployed training version beside it. The warning was gone. Selvarik's expression did not change. but her fingers tightened against the edge of her table. Varen said, "Can you verify chain of custody?" Tomas Venstut. Earth submits Calira Ring Director access logs and pre-deployment mirrors. Savax were in rows from the medical platform. Every face turned toward him. He looked at Varen first, then at Mira, then at the chamber. "The logs are accurate," he said. Calira Ring did not receive the Earth warning. Orison represented the model as compliant with Council adaptive triage standards. Had the warning remained attached, I would have been required to flag the human trauma model for review. Varen's face hardened. "Dr. Runn, are you stating that vendor modifications prevented hospital review?" "Yes." Selvaric stood too quickly. Orison optimized redundant annotations. The phrase in question did not alter injury scans. It only concerned behavioral interpretation. Mira turned toward her. "Behavioral interpretation is why they died." Tomas opened the next file. The chamber display showed Orison's signed terms for functional distress adjustment and labor cost delay modifier. The chamber did not erupt. It did something worse for Orison. It became attentive. Mira explained it without technical clutter. If a human industrial worker stayed responsive after injury, the grid lowered urgency. If the worker fell into certain insurance categories, delayed intervention reduced projected cost. The system did not say, "Let them die." It said, "They can wait." It said, "Immediate care is less efficient." It said, "Function remains." That was how cruelty survived in clean systems. It avoided ugly language. Varen asked Selvaric, "Did Orison include labor cost variables in emergency priority modeling?" Cell's warm voice cooled. "Resource allocation requires sustainability modeling." The answer moved through the chamber like a crack in glass. Mira saw it reach Savax. She saw it reach delegates who had been prepared to dismiss her. She saw the shift, not to agreement yet, but to doubt. Doubt was enough to open a door. Varen tried to close it. Even if Orison exceeded its mandate, Nurse Halden's proposed remedy remains dangerous. If every species claims hidden distress, common triage may become impossible. Mira had expected that. Tomas had warned her. Earth wants special mercy. Earth wants separate rules. Earth wants to break the shared system because humans dislike where they rank. She stepped away from the evidence pylon. "I'm not asking the Council to believe humans hurt more," she said. "I'm asking the Council to stop assuming humans hurt less because we stay useful longer." No one interrupted. "And I'm not asking for a human exception. I am asking for a medical standard that protects any patient whose suffering does not look convenient to the machine. If a species freezes instead of screams, listen. If a species goes silent instead of thrashing, check. If a patient keeps working because others will die if they stop, do not call that stability. Call the warning." She looked at Varen, then at Cell, then at the tiers of delegates. "You taught your system that human courage means human bodies can wait. You mistook our silence for permission. You mistook our discipline for low distress. You mistook our last acts of kindness for proof that we did not need mercy." Selvaric tried one final path. She requested that the chamber consider whether Earth should improve patient disclosure training before demanding system revision. It was a clever pivot. It sounded practical. It shifted the burden back onto the injured. Mira answered before Tomas could stop her. "Teach humans to report pain better," she said. "I agree. Teach workers that a hospital bed is not something they have to earn by sounding desperate. Teach crews that saying I need help is not failure. But do not build a system that waits for that lesson while people die." She looked at the delegates, then back at Cell. Medicine does not get to blame the patient for being culturally trained to endure. Medicine adapts, or is not medicine. It is sorting. For the first time, Savax bowed his head. It was a small movement. Mira saw it anyway. She touched the final file. Alara Voss's voice filled the chamber. It was weaker than the earlier recordings. Not dramatic. Not pleading. Just tired. "Did Toman get the bed?" A medic answered off record. "Yes. He got the bed." Alara breathed out. "Good. He's little." He was scared. The recording ended. Mira waited. Then she said, "Alara Voss did not know Toman before the blast. He was a Vare apprentice assigned to dock for that morning." She met him 12 minutes before the accident. He was not her son. He was not her crew. He was not human. The chamber held still. Mira's voice softened, but it did not weaken. The grid marked her other directed attention as low distress. It lowered her score because she was still able to care about someone else. That is the moment this system failed. Not because it failed Earth alone, but because it failed to recognize mercy when a dying woman showed it. No one spoke. For the first time since entering the chamber, Mira let herself look up at the high public gallery. Behind the privacy shimmer, she could make out movement, bodies leaning forward, translators glowing. Somewhere beyond that chamber, Earth families were listening. So were workers on Hestar 6. So were patients in hospital beds who had said they were fine because they thought fine was what the world needed from them. Varen's next words came slowly. What does Earth request? Tomas Vin began to stand, but Mira shook her head once. He sat back. Immediate suspension of mercy grid deployment for all human labor populations, Mira said. Independent review of every human death delayed under functional distress adjustment. Removal of cost variables from emergency triage. Full investigation of Origin mutual care. A patient behavior safeguard for every species in council medicine. She breathed once. In a new standard, no emergency system may reduce urgency because a patient remains calm, useful, or silent when skin evidence suggests serious harm. Selvarik said, that would require network-wide revision. Mira looked at her. Yes, it would be expensive. So was burying the dead. The sentence landed harder than she expected. It was not polished. It was not diplomatic. It was true. Varen recessed the chamber. The public feed cut, but the damage kept moving. In the side room, Tomas monitored the outside channels while Mira sat with her hands folded around a cup she had not touched. Labor stations were replaying the Alera audio. Earth medical forums were posting the removed warning in every language they could translate. On Hestar 6, workers had stopped painting white bands and had begun writing names on them. Tomas read one update aloud, then stopped because his voice had changed. A group of Ver dock apprentices had gathered outside Kalura Ring with white bands around their small upper arms. They were not Earth. They had worn the bands for Alera. Mira closed her eyes for one breath. That was the part Origin had never understood. Human dignity did not become smaller when shared. It became harder to erase. For 3 hours, the council argued behind sealed doors. Mira waited in a side room with Tomas, Savax, Jalen on a remote line, and Lien Rusk, who had come after Caleb woke and refused to sign. Lien stood near the wall, arms crossed, eyes red from lack of sleep. Caleb wants to testify if they call him, she said. He should be resting, Mira said. He said that's what got everyone in trouble. Humans resting only after the work is done. Mira almost laughed, but the sound turned into a breath. Savax stood apart from them. He had not asked forgiveness. She was grateful for that. Forgiveness would have made the room too easy. Whatever happens, he said, Kalira Ring will change intake review. I can do that without waiting for council vote. Mira looked at him. Will you? Yes. Even if the council protects Origin? Especially then. The doors opened before she could answer. Before they stepped back into the chamber, Lien caught Mira by the sleeve. Caleb said to tell them one thing if you get the chance, she said. Mira waited. He said humans say we're fine because most of the time nobody pays us to be anything else. But when a hospital asks, it should know better than the job site. Mira nodded once. She did not know whether she could use the words, but she carried them in with her. Some sentences were not evidence. They were compass points. The chamber had changed when they returned. The delegates seemed less like an audience and more like people who knew their votes would be remembered. Varen OSK read the decision himself. The council would suspend the Mercy Grid update. Orza Mutual Care would be placed under public investigation for unauthorized triage modifiers and removal of clinical warnings. All human industrial patient deaths involving functional distress adjustment would be reopened. Cost modeling would be banned from emergency priority decisions. A cross-species medical board would draft a new safeguard standard using Earth trauma medicine, Kalira Ring records, and testimony from field medics across member worlds. The decision did not give Earth everything. It did not dissolve Orison. It did not name every dead worker in the public order. It did not promise that no committee would soften the rule later. Power rarely surrendered cleanly. Mira understood that before Tomas explained it. But the decision changed the ground. Orison would no longer argue from behind a sealed model. Kalira Ring would no longer call the quiet cases isolated. Earth families would be allowed to reopen claims. Most importantly, hospitals across council space would receive an immediate warning that human calm after trauma was not a comfort sign. For a system built on delay, that warning was a blade. Then Varen paused. Pending formal ratification, this chamber recognizes an emergency interim rule proposed under the name Halden Standard. No patient shall be deprioritized because endurance, silence, cooperation, or continued function causes their suffering to appear less urgent than their injuries indicate. Mira did not move. The name struck her last, not because she wanted it, because names attached to standards often came from the dead. This one had come from the living, but it belonged to all the quiet cases behind her. Sen varik objektet on procedural kroons. Varen denied the objection. For the first time, a sound rose in the chamber that was not a murmur or a protest. It was not applause either. Too many species expressed approval differently for one sound to dominate. Some struck rings. Some flashed color. Some lowered their heads. The Earth gallery remained almost silent. Mira understood that silence. It was not low distress. It was people holding themselves together. After the hearing, reporters filled the outer corridor. Tomas handled most questions. Savax vanished into a medical board cluster. Jalen sent Mira a message that said only, "I dislike being brave. Never ask again." Caleb sent a message too. Didn't sign. Below it, a second line appeared. Alara would have yelled at me if I did. Mira stood beside a window overlooking the council complex and allowed herself 30 seconds to breathe. Varen OSK approached without staff. "Nurse Halden," he said. She turned. "Counselor." He looked older outside the chamber. Less certain, more dangerous, perhaps, because doubt had entered him and he did not yet know what it would become. "You should know that many delegates will resent Earth for this," he said. "For asking hospitals not to let us die quietly. For forcing a public correction. Systems do not enjoy being corrected in public." Mira looked back at the chamber doors. Patients do not enjoy dying in private. Varen held her gaze for a long moment. Then he inclined his head barely. It was not gratitude. It was not friendship. It was recognition. "Your species is difficult to measure," he said. Mira picked up her bag. "Only if you confuse pain with noise." She returned to Kalira Ring 2 days later. The hospital looked the same from the shuttle. Clean white curve. Bright docking lights. A council emblem large enough to be seen by the moon below. But inside, the intake wall had changed. Not completely. No system changed completely in 2 days. But above the Mercy score display, a new interim warning blinked in calm blue letters. It told staff that if a human patient appeared calm, they should check for internal trauma and never delay care because of low vocal distress. Mira stood in the intake bay and read it once. Dr. Savak's run came to stand beside her. "It is temporary language," he said. "The board will refine it. It is a start." Yes. The ward doors opened before either of them said more. A transport team brought in 3 patients from a cargo lock failure. One was human, middle-aged, wearing a cracked pressure suit and a stubborn expression. He kept telling the orderlies that the others needed help first. The new alert flashed before the grid could settle. Mira moved toward him. "Name?" "Aaron Pike," he said. "I'm Fine. Just check the pilot first." Mira took his wrist and felt the rapid, thin pulse beneath his calm voice. "We'll check the pilot," she said. "And we are checking you now." He tried to object. His breath caught halfway through the first word. Savax was already calling for Bay 3. No one blocked the path. No drone questioned the priority. No one waited for the quiet man to collapse before believing he was in danger. Later, after Aaron Pike was stable, Mira stood at the edge of the intake bay with a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands. The hospital hummed around her. The work had not become easy. It never would. People still came in hurt. Systems still needed watching. Power still looked for clean ways to protect itself. But something had shifted. Across council space, in hospitals Mira would never see, human workers would still say they were fine. They would still try to sit up. They would still ask whether someone else needed the bed more. They would still carry their pain carefully because that was what many humans did when others were afraid. Now, at least, the system had been forced to listen harder. Mira thought of Alara Voss asking about a frightened apprentice who was not hers. She thought of Caleb Rusk refusing to sell her guilt for his family's safety. She thought of every quiet case that had stopped being a statistic and become a warning. The next transport alarm sounded. For 1 second, everyone in the intake bay looked at the wall. That old hesitation still lived in them. Then the new warning blinked again, and 2 alien orderlies moved before Mira spoke. One prepared the scanner. The other cleared Bay 3. Mira felt the change not as triumph, but as practice. This was how a standard became real. Not in the chamber where it was named, but in the first small moment when tired staff chose to obey it. She put on her nursing coat and walked toward the doors before the next patient reached them. Humanity had not won by being louder than the galaxy. It had won by making the galaxy answer for what it had failed to hear. Thank you for listening to this story. If Mira Halden's fight stayed with you, maybe it is because this was never only about medicine or machines or one broken system. It was about something quieter than power and stronger than fear. It was about the people who keep standing when they are hurting. The people who say, "I'm fine," not because they are fine, but because someone beside them still needs help. And maybe that is one of humanity's most dangerous truths. We do not always make the loudest sound in the room. But when we suffer, when we endure, when we protect each other through the pain, the universe should learn to listen closer. If this story moved you, please give a like, share it with someone who enjoys powerful science fiction, and subscribe to the channel for more stories about Earth, humanity, and the moments when the galaxy finally learns what humans are made of. And as always, thank you for being here. Your time, your attention, and your support help keep these stories alive.